Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami ito parang sakajang dhammo sotapoti. So again, welcome to the BSV, listening to the Dhamma this morning. This is good that you all turned up on a Sunday morning. It's really good, and it's nice to do, even though we can't do these things in person. We'd still have the opportunity to listen to the Dhamma and do it online, and do it from the comfort of our own home, kind of thing. And so I'll start by making like a not a very astute claim in that obviously at the moment we're sort of in the midst in Melbourne and in New South Wales and in different places. We're still in the midst of this kind of lockdown and this sort of perpetual state of limbo, of suspended animation, of when will this thing stop, kind of thing. And it's no great surprise that because we've sort of been in this extended period for so long, extended lockdown for so long, that it does bring about these different kinds of feelings of frustration and different feelings of suffering, and it comes out in many different ways. And one of the ways that it does actually come out, and something that is common to most people and most people's experience of the extended lockdowns, and this is whether you're a Buddhist or not, whether you're a meditator or you're not, is we can have times during this where we actually feel very sort of despondent, and we feel sort of in a way like hopeless, as like, when is this thing ever gonna end? We have these feelings of like when we sort of get up and it's like why bother? It's just sort of another day of the same kind of thing. So this seems like a pretty common thing that we all sort of experience. So I thought I'd maybe talk a little bit about that today, this feelings of despondency, hopelessness, despair, sort of frustration. As I said, this feeling of, why bother? It's just more of the same. Thought I'd speak about that today, but then also, why some of these things come about, and also some of the things that we can actually do to overcome this. And the way I will sort of talk about this, what I'm thinking about with this, is the way that we can overcome these kinds of things is actually relating our situation to something that we call the 8 worldly conditions, or the 8 worldly Dhammas. Some of you might be familiar with the 8 worldly Dhammas. They're a set of, you could say, like a set of dichotomous variables of positive and negative things that happen in our existence that the Buddha talked about, whereby that we're all sort of subject to these things. So looking at ways that we can sort of look at our situation in relation to that, and developing wisdom around the 8 worldly conditions, and developing patience around them, and developing gratitude around them as well. So, but before I sort of like launch into any of that, one sort of caveat, one sort of disclaimer I want to make first before I start is that I'm going to be talking about this, as I said, this kind of feeling of despondency, hopelessness that we have from being in extended periods of lockdown, and what that sort of brought about for us. So I'm going to be making some very broad generalizations, very broad societal level generalizations. I'm not talking about any one particular specific situation or instance of any one person's experience and the different kinds of suffering that they might have. Obviously there are these very, there's some very sort of like serious things that have happened because of the pandemic, and things that have sort of come to light that that were sort of under the surface and we didn't really know that were there. There's these, obviously these like very objectively serious and terrible kinds of things, like increased rates of suicide, increased rates of domestic violence, increased rates of like child sexual abuse and all these kinds of things, and even to the point of increased mental illness, not being able to see your family and all these kinds of things. Also, there's all these objective terrible things that have come about because of the lockdown. And so what I'm going to talk about today, I'm not trying to minimize that in any way, any of those kinds of things. More, as I said, what I'm talking about is this general level of despondency from things, being, generally okay, but we just sort of feel this kind of frustration towards the situation. So why do we actually then experience this when, objectively, if you sort of like look out in society at the moment and the kind of lockdown that we're in and the sort of the pandemic we're in at the moment, if you look at it objectively, and you compare it to other kind of disasters in history, wars, other plagues, all these kinds of things, actually things are pretty good. If you haven't been to, but I'm assuming the supermarkets are all full of food. We have access to like good medical care. We have government support for people that have fallen on economic hard times. And there's all these things about it where it's like, even you do your job at the moment, you can still make your living from home now. Your children, their education there hasn't been interrupted. So there's all these things where it's, objectively, when you compare it to other disasters in history, it's not so bad. So why do we sort of you'd think with those bigger disasters and things like that, that would be the things that more lead to this kind of despondency and hopelessness. So why are we feeling this now with this current pandemic? And so I think a good way to understand why we're experiencing things like this at the moment is through this phenomena. It's called learned helplessness, and this was sort of discovered in the early 70s, late 60s, or something like that. Can't remember, but yeah, it's been around. It's been around for a fair while. And what learned helplessness is this feeling that when you're sort of exposed to negative stimuli for a long period of time, you end up sort of giving up on it. And the way they found this is what they did is they had like a cage kind of thing, and the floor, they had two sections of the floor and a little net in the middle of it. And so they put a dog in one side of the floor, and the dog could jump over the net and all these kinds of things, and they electrified one side of the floor. And so obviously electrified the side of the floor, and it's not a big electric, it wasn't going to kill the dog, it's just like an electric shock, and the dog would jump over to the other side to get away from the electric shock that it was getting. But what happened is they ended up electrifying the other side of the floor as well. So wherever the dog would jump to, it's still getting electrocuted. And so he's got no way to get out of it. So what ends up happening is the dog's in this cage, there's no other place to get out, and the floor's electrocuted. So what actually ends up happening is dog ends up just giving up and just lying on the floor and getting electrocuted over and over and over again. It's just like, I can't get out of this. It's, it basically just gives up, sees no other way out of it. So, some of us may think we're sort of in the same kind of situation as I'm sort of locked in my home and there's no way out and I'm just keep getting these kind of electric shocks. But if we consider our situation at the moment, it's, as I said, it's not, objectively it's not that bad. The kind of shocks we're getting, it's not that bad. You still, you've still got, you've still got Netflix, you've still got all these kinds of things, you've still got, you can do all the things you need to do. So why do we have this feeling of despondency and hopelessness? And I've sort of been thinking about it a little bit, and through conversations with different people, kind of thing. And one of the big things we can look at in our society at the moment, and again, I'm speaking about developed, more developed nations, Australia, America, UK, all these kinds of developed nations, is you can look at the period we are in history now, and especially after the Second World War, things have been getting exponentially a lot better for us. This is even actually happening in developing nation quality of life, life expectancy, child mortality rates, the amount of nutrition you can get every day. Things have been getting better for a long period of time, and if I sort of look at my own life, I'm from, what is it? I'm from Generation X, so anyone that's sort of about my age, even maybe a little bit older, if we've grown up in these developed nations, nothing bad has really actually happened to me. I've never been in any wars. I've never sort of had, my houses blowing up around me. I've never been, in a society where a dictator's sort of overthrown. I've never been in this situation of mass economic collapse or anything in my life. I've had none of those, big kind of experiences in my life that are objectively quite bad. And so for me, again, I've been very, very fortunate. And so I think a lot of us sort of share that same kind of good fortune that we actually have. And so what happens when you have this for a long period of time, you sort of expect things to be this way all the time. You expect things to be positive, and you think that the positive things that are in life have become permanent. And when that permanency and that positive it stops in some way, or some part of it's taken away from you, you're just not used to that, and that sort of shatters your experience kind of thing. And when the more negative sides of things come in, we also start to think that is permanent. And especially, say for example, with the lockdown, this is something that's dragged on a while. So we think, okay, it just sort of in the back of your mind, you're always thinking it's always going to be like this. Again, like this dog, it's like I've been shocked so many times, why bother? The plans that we try to make, the plans that we try to make, different things in our lives that we want it to change, and it's just everything gets sort of thrown asunder. And so when these negative aspects come about, we think that this is permanent as well. And just like we think the positive side of for the past few decades, everything's been going well. We think that that's permanent. We think that that's not going to change. But if we investigate and look at one of the teachings of the Buddha, as I said, the eight worldly conditions, we see that things can't always be like this, can't always be good, can't always be bad. And just to backtrack a little bit, for anybody that maybe doesn't know exactly what I'm talking about when I say the 8 worldly conditions or the 8 worldly Dhammas, again, they're these positive and negative aspects of each person's experience that everybody has to go through. And this is something the Buddha said, that the 8 worldly condition is, he said that everything in the world revolves around the 8 worldly conditions, and the world revolves around them. And those 8 worldly conditions, as I said, they're sort of dichotomous pairs of variables that are positive and negative, or just 8 things. So the first one is gain, and the second one is loss. So you can see that there's a positive and then a negative side there. The third one, I should say, is good repute, good repute, or fame. It's sometimes translated as fame, and disrepute. So, and then you have praise, and then you have blame, and you have pain and pleasure. So you have these 8 things that have a positive and negative valence, and everybody in the world is subject to them. Even the Buddha was subject to them. The Buddha was subject to pain. The Buddha was subject to disrepute. The Buddha was subject to pain. Like, everybody's susceptible to these things, whether you're enlightened, whether you're not enlightened, whether you're rich, you're poor, whether you're, you have a good standing in society, whatever it actually is, everybody is susceptible to these things. And what the Buddha actually said about the 8 worldly conditions is that when an uninstructed worldly disciple, which basically means anybody that's not enlightened at all, so pretty much everybody, when we come up against these gain or loss, repute, disrepute, praise, blame, pain or pleasure, we forget that these things are impermanent, that these things are suffering, that these things are subject to change. And when an uninstructed worldly disciple experiences this and forgets that they're impermanent, suffering and subject to change, we become obsessed by them. The gain that we have, we become obsessed by it. The loss that we have, we become obsessed by it. This sort of overtakes our thinking. And when it overtakes our thinking, we become attracted to the positive side of the eight worldly Dhamma. So we become attracted to gain, to praise, to repute, to pleasure, and we become repulsed by loss, disrepute, and blame and pain. So we forget that these things are impermanent, suffering and subject to change. But what the Buddha called an instructed, a noble disciple of the Buddha, basically somebody that's enlightened, when they experience the eight worldly conditions, they remember and they know that this is impermanent, that this is suffering, that this is subject to change. And because they know this, then their minds aren't obsessed by the eight worldly conditions. They don't become attracted to the positive side of them. They don't become repulsed by the negative side of them. And they are able to move through life without this sort of massive suffering that comes along with it. So again, tying this kind of feeling of despondency, hopelessness, back to the eight worldly Dhammas, we've so many things in our life have been sort of skewed towards the positive aspect of the eight worldly Dhammas for so long that we think that they're permanent. And now that a little bit it's sort of flicked to the other side, where the negative sides of the eight worldly Dhammas have come about, it throws us asunder, and because it's been happening for a little while, we think it's permanent. But we forget that it's impermanent. We forget that it's suffering. We forget that it's subject to change. We basically forget these things, and we think these negative things that are happening to us are permanent. And because we think they're permanent, we start to feel despondent. We start to feel hopeless again, like the dog sort of locked in the cage. You think you can't get out of this, so you just sort of lie down. Whereas if we think about it, at some point, even the negative sides of the eight worldly Dhammas, this has to end. There's no other way it can be any other way. Everything has to end. Lockdowns have to end. The protests have to end. Like COVID in general has to end. Everything has to end. Governments and nations and cultures and languages and societies and species and planets and our sun will end, our earth will end, our galaxy will end, the universe will end at some point. Everything is going to end at some point. So, maybe, bringing it back to a bit more of a localized temporal place in space and time of your current experience and this feeling of despondency and things like that. How do we therefore deal with these levels of despondency and hopelessness and this kind of feeling that you just sort of had enough? Well, the Buddha gave us the remedy for that of investigating the eight worldly Dhammas, the eight worldly conditions. We can, I think some of the ways that we can overcome this kind of despondency, this sense of hopelessness, is there's a few tools you could say that we can use. We can use the wisdom of the Buddha. We can use panya to investigate the eight worldly conditions. But another tool that we actually have is developing what we call khanti, or another word for that is patience, or patience and endurance. But then also developing gratitude towards the particular kind of situation that we're in at the moment. So to develop wisdom towards the eight worldly conditions, we do those things that the Buddha said. When we experience any of the eight worldly conditions, we try to investigate them as something that is impermanent, as something that is inherently has some kind of suffering there, and that they are subject to change. We investigate our situation with wisdom and just knowing that this is just the way it is at the moment. It can't be any other way. Nobody can escape the positive and negative sides of the 8 worldly Dhammas. So we just know that it is this way, and at some point, it will have to change. Whether it's good, it has to change. Whether it's bad, it has to change. We can develop a lot of wisdom around this by continuing to look at our situation in this way, and that's all well and good. You finish the talk today, you go back, oh great, Ajahn Sādaro said everything's impermanent, lockdown will end. You tell yourself this morning, you sort of tell yourself this again tomorrow afternoon, and it's like, oh yeah, it's going to end at some time. 2 days away, you tell yourself, it's still going, kind of thing. 3 days, a month away, we're still in lockdown. So I thought this was going to end at some point. So just doing this is not enough. We also have to, develop the quality of khanti. We have to develop the quality of patience and patience endurance. You can see at the moment, like people, they're not displaying much khanti. They're not displaying much patience because it's like we're sort of like almost out of it, and it's like, well, nah, I'm frustrated. I need to, I just don't have the patience to deal with this to the end. So I'm going to go out and do all these things and watch the football and all these kind of strange things. So we have to also develop patience and endurance. We have to develop khanti when we find ourselves in any of these, especially the negative sides of the 8 worldly Dhammas. The Buddha said that developing khanti, developing patience, this is the I can't remember the exact term, but he said it's the greatest kind of like fire that burns up the defilements. So just developing this faculty of patience and endurance is something that it might seem tedious, but it's something that is something that's so important. But then there's the other side of it as well, where we can actually start to, as part of our practice, as part of our meditation practice, as part of our, sort of more formalized Dhamma practice, we can try to develop this sense of gratitude as well towards our situation that we have at the moment, and especially to develop gratitude towards the aspects of the 8 worldly conditions that we've experienced, the positive sides, and sort of looking at our experience and thinking, well, what are some of the positive things that we have at the moment? What are some of the more positive aspects of the 8 worldly conditions that we are actually living at the moment? And you might sort of like look at that in the midst of sort of your suffering and go, well, there's nothing there to be grateful for. But the more we actually look at our situation, the more we can find many, many things to be grateful for. And the closer we look at it as well, we can even see aspects of the negative sides of the 8 worldly conditions, and we can actually be very grateful for some of those things as well. You maybe think back to some of the times in your life where you've sort of fallen into the negative side of the 8 worldly conditions. You might have gone through some kind of loss. You might have gone through some kind of blame for something that you mightn't have done. You might have gone through some kind of criticism or disrepute, or you might have gone through some kind of pain. And actually going through that experience was the thing that made you the person you are now. You grew from it. You learned from it. It probably can be one of the most invaluable lessons that you learn in your life. So we can try to look at the 8 worldly conditions. We can look at the different aspects of it as it's occurring in our lives, and actually develop some kind of gratitude for it. Look again, if you look at your own situation again. For me, as I said, my life's been very, very fortunate. If you look out in society, again, you go to the supermarket, it's full of food, there's medical care available, you can do your job from home, you can still earn your living, you're not in a failed state, you're not in a war zone, you haven't like lost everything from, like somebody like air raid bombings kind of thing where you've had to run away, and then now that you're a refugee sort of moving throughout the world. There's so many of these things where things are good around you on a societal level. But then also, if you look at your own experience as well. Just this simple fact that you're alive, just this simple fact that you're aware, that you're awake, that you're conscious. This is the probabilities of you being the person that you are right now is just, it's astronomical. It's so, you arising in the world is so rare. And the good fortune you have to be born as a human and be born in this state and be born in this, being born in this time right now, it's so wondrous. You have the opportunity now to, you're sitting there, you're listening to this on a computer in a nice home and all these kinds of things. And the probabilities of you being who you are in this moment are astronomical. You think of the sort of the genetic lineage that sort of goes back all the way, all the different kinds of relatives you had, the probabilities that you are the person you are now, the kind of the way that the continents and planets formed, and all these kinds of things that have brought you to this point of you being awake and alive at this moment. It's phenomenal, and even just being able to experience this now. This also means that you likely you don't have a terminal illness at the moment. You're healthy. You're awake. You're alive. You're not you're not in some sort of hospital dulled by morphine or whatever. You're awake, and you have this life to live, and you have people around, you have friends around, you have so many things around, and it's nice. It's like the sun's out, it's spring, there's birds around, there's so many things about this life that you can be grateful for, but you just have to look for them, and you have to continue to keep looking for them. Because all you really have is your experience. You don't have anything else, whether your experience is good or whether your experience is bad. This is what you actually have. All you have is the moment that you have right now. There is nothing else besides that. But just to have this moment, it's so improbable that you should try to be grateful for it, and try to be grateful for the experience that you've actually got. So while it can feel like we might feel hopeless and we might feel despair and all these kinds of things, if we consider these things and we try to develop gratitude for these different aspects of our lives, this is what can help us overcome this feeling of, well, why should I bother with it anymore? Why, I just feel hopeless. It's there's so much out there to be grateful for. So maybe with that, I'll sort of wrap it up, and this is something hopefully that we can sort of take, and when we do have those periods where we do feel a little bit down, we do feel a little bit despondent because of this sort of extended lockdown, we can try to develop these aspects of gratitude. We can develop the wisdom towards these different factors of the 8 worldly conditions. Again, gain, loss, fame, disrepute, praise, blame, pain, and pleasure. The reason we might feel this kind of despondency at the moment is because we've just sort of forgot that the 8 worldly conditions are sort of operating in this way, and we're just sort of stuck in a little bit more of a negative side of it. But if we can actually, look at our lives and develop wisdom around the 8 worldly conditions, then we can actually see that at some level all of this actually will end. And if we develop patience in the more negative times, it will eventually change. And if we can develop gratitude for the things that we do have, this is a good way for us to overcome this kind of, despondency and hopelessness that we have for these things. So, with that might be enough of me talking about sort of despondency and hopelessness, and hopefully it's given you some sort of hope, and hopefully it's given you some kind of other aspect there that's not just weighed on more hopelessness and terribleness and all these kinds of things. So hopefully it's been useful for you in some way. Hopefully it's been useful for you in your practice, and these are some things that you can recollect and think about, and hopefully it can help you move closer towards seeing the Dhamma. So with that, we can maybe open it up to some questions.